All right, Sharon, you want to get us going?
Sure. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to sharing some thoughts with you in terms of how we've been able to help organizations look at different ways to be more operationally effective. And as a result of that, have actually been able to make some incredible gains within their organization. I'm Sharon Conklin. I am a nurse and have been in the business for over 30 years, working both as a consultant and as an executive in the healthcare industry. And Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Aaron Dobias. I'm the VP of Strategy and Development for Healthcare IQ. So we're a data integration and analytics company, and my role spans both customer-facing or industry-facing and also with our R&D department. So I kind of have a foot in both worlds.
So actually, Aaron and I have worked together for a very long time. Healthcare IQ has an incredible data tool, and I have found that it's probably the most reliable tool in the industry, because as we go and we start working with organizations, data integration and data accuracy is going to be key to whatever you are doing within an organization, and it certainly lends itself to your credibility. So if you can't get in front of folks with the right kind of data and it composed in the right way, then we end up struggling with being able to move an organization forward. Aaron and I put our heads together a few years ago, and we realized that for what we do, there's not like one company that actually can sit together and work with an organization, be able to pull their data together and help move them forward in a healthcare industry. And we do it in a way that we empower our customers to be able to take that information and be able to move their own self forward. So we say, we want them to be able to know more, achieve more, and make good things happen in healthcare is what our motto is, and we like to pass that on with the client. By combining our companies, we actually have healthcare leadership experience across our organization from 20 to over 44 years. So we're have quite a breadth and depth within our organization. Business experience is anywhere from 20 to 49 years, and we're comprised of CEOs, CFOs, COOs, your typical leadership, as well as your end users within the organization. Depending on what kind of problem they're solving, we typically have that person who is within our organizations to be able to tap into. Healthcare IQ and Catalyst, we've always been focused in healthcare. It's a passion of ours. It is clearly an area that is complex, and it takes dedication to really understand the issues and be able to resolve the problems. But because most organizations, their problems may seem the same, you approach them oftentimes very differently. So we have to be able to put together a program that's both agile and scalable, something that we can flex to whatever the need is on the in the organization. We have multidisciplinary experience, like I had shared before, and we do an incredible ROI, as you'll see later in this presentation, for our clients. I think the key to what makes us successful and how we're able to move our clients forward is that we do understand the complexity within healthcare. How does workflow go? How do we get to operating assumptions? We find ourselves oftentimes even teaching, a lot of the engineers that are at hospitals, because it's very difficult to marry clinical process flow sometimes with process flow. So being able to help them understand how those flows align oftentimes helps move an organization forward. The way we approach our clients' issues is very, very different. And you'll see in the case study we're going to show you today how if you look at data different, oftentimes you get to a different outcome. So what we look at, we look at cost and revenue. We look at how we can help our organizations implement and how we can support them in achieving their goals. You know, at the end of the day, we think our approach is unique. It is extensive clinical and has extensive operational and clinical analysis, and we're committed to sustainable outcomes. That is the key. You know, oftentimes people come into an organization and they're able to achieve some, but its key is about how you're able to transfer that knowledge so that organizations can address the root causes in their organization, and they're able to sustain that once you have left. Aaron, you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So we're going to go into a case study now, but I think it's important to preface that collaboration that Sharon talked about with a little bit of the how we do that. So Healthcare IQ being a data integration and analytics company, the thing we focus on initially is speed to value. So we're going to focus on getting all of the data, and you see here on the left side of the screen, right? Every system within the hospital, materials management, OR, EMR, financial accounting, right? Operational schedule data, all of those different data sets. You need a cohesive view of that data, right? All the data in one place in order to make the impacts that Sharon is talking about. So Healthcare IQ can come in, and we're going to go into detail a little bit later on a little bit of the technology and how we do that. But really, ideally, we're leveraging all our technology to very quickly pull all that data in, get a single data set end to end for the given encounter, given customer or engagement, and then the two teams coming together, Healthcare IQ and Catalyst, leveraging all that knowledge that we have that Sharon talked about in order to execute on all of the data that we're able to put together very, very quickly. And like I said, we'll go into a little bit more data details later, but this is essentially the preface or the pre-work that's done in order to be able to do the things that Sharon was talking about. And that's why Sharon and I see that value together of bringing all the data together so that we can both, you know, our focus is more supply side, clinical variation, et cetera. Sharon on the operations, revenue, it's, you know, so it's this really great cooperative view. So yeah, I'll hand it back to Sharon and I'll let her jump right into the case study.
Yeah, and one other note on this is that, you know, I think what's unique, and you will see, is that the information that we provide organizations, oftentimes people will go in, they will benchmark organizations and show how, how they measure to others. And while KPIs are important, what we find organizations really desperately needing is the information that they can actually take action on, not a retrospective measure of where they may not be as effective as they should be. So what's going to be key is how we actually uncover the information to actually correct the problems that may be causing them issues, and the data is actually, you can do something with it. So with that, we take that data and we actually establish an approach for each organization. So in buckets, and I know this is a little bit of an eyesore, but it's really not meant to be read. It's really a slide to talk about how we approach it. So one of the key things is understanding what your operating norm is, or what an organization's operating norm is. So how are they operating today? What does it look like? And being able to identify clearly what some of the concerns and issues are that may be driving inefficiencies in the organization. We also look at productivity, which is going to be important, and what are some of the things that are impeding productivity. Looking at how we maximize the ROI for you, also looking at simulation and throughput, doing all of those types of analysis, and then do an informed operational design. So that when we say an operational design, it's about looking at the organization and creating a solution that will move an organization forward. So with that, we'll talk about a case study. And so we're going to talk about using predictive analytics to really inform the strategic and operational direction for an organization. And we're going to use one of our customers as an example of how we were able to move them forward. So in our case study, it's an integrated operational study, level one trauma center, academic medical center, about 1,000, a little over 1,000 beds, 54 operating rooms, 115,000 ER visits. I mean, they're very, very busy. But they had some real challenges in their organization. Their growth had outpaced their actual environment, and their growth was very rapid. So it had created a lot of operational congestions and bottlenecks throughout the organization. And it, because of the fast growth, because they're a level one trauma center, perioperative services actually ended up being the area we focused a lot on, because when you look at perioperative services, it impacts central processing, it impacts the supply side, it impacts, the ICU and how your beds fill, and how fast you can take a patient through from the ED. So there were a lot of dynamics that were going on. One of the things that we saw was that their central processing was very dated. It was very restricted in how they could expand, and clearly they could not meet the demand. There was a transplant program that had been put in place, and it actually doubled in 2 years. And for folks who have not been exposed to those types of programs, those are very complex, very supply and equipment intensive cases. So it could really put some constrictions on an organization. The other complexity was that the ORs were actually broken up into 6 different locations. So instead of operating as a perioperative unit, they were operating as 6 separate ORs. So they were not consistent. A lot of their processes were different, and they were just an overload, where some areas were being just worked around the clock, other areas were not being, not even making the demand that they needed to make. So we needed to look at how we brought all of that together. When we did the analysis for how constrained they were or how overloaded, we saw immediately that they needed 12 operating rooms. That's a lot of operating rooms for organization, and it tells you kind of how much pressure, was on this particular client. They needed 40 plus ICU beds. They needed 275 med-surg beds. In fact, they had enough to actually create a whole separate, like community hospital. But they were constrained into this one area. So it required to really look at a strategic facility master plan in terms of where could they grow, where could they move, and how could we transform that organization. So, we started putting together the plan, like I showed, what's our approach and how do we do it. And so we looked at data analytics, and we wanted to look at operational efficiencies and if there was opportunity to reduce costs, because if you're going to end up having to expand like this, you've got to be able to have, some revenue coming from somewhere. And so we wanted to look and see if there were revenue enhancement opportunities. We put together a lot of cross-functional teams so that you had more visibility into the issue and more synergy in terms of coming up with solutions to be able to resolve those problems. We are a lean organization, so we do promote lean methodologies. And so just working toward eliminating a lot of the waste was one of the things that we were looking for. And some of that waste, especially around perioperative, was supplies, staff time, rework space, and the list just goes on. And then looking at staffing benchmarks and KPI metrics. So it's one thing to have these larger KPIs, but if you can create day-to-day KPIs for people who is going to help them with their day-to-day operations, that's what's going to be key to being able to help them move, their organization forward. So one of the things we do is try to understand, what's going on in the organization, and understanding their cultural variances. And so when we talk about that, we talk about, for this organization, it was a children's hospital, it was a level one trauma center. There are different services that you actually provide for patients. When you blend those two services, the cultures are different, the patients are different. So we want to understand what's going on, and we want to understand what impact it's having. So when I look at this is just one small snapshot of just 5 of those 54 rooms that was in one location. And we wanted to understand, and also the C-section room, we wanted to understand what's really going on. So when you look at the green, the dark green, it's telling me that there's over 75% utilization in their actual available minutes, that their ORs are open for business. And then when it gets lighter and moves more to yellow and more to red, that starts showing less and less utilization at that time. So if you'll see in the slide, there's a lot of red, there's a lot of yellow, and there's a lot of light green. But they were literally, so compressed that they barely could get their cases through as the demand, as demand kept increasing. And so what could we do to find out what was causing, some of these lower utilization numbers and what was creating those bottlenecks? So one of the first things we did was we benchmarked their space. And we said, okay, where, based off of standards, where should they be? So the red line down the middle really talks about, kind of where the averages are, where you can benchmark. And the more you move to the left, the smaller the rooms or the less efficient those rooms are, how undersized they are. So you can see right from the beginning, when we benchmarked these rooms, they were small, they were cumbersome. It was very difficult to be able to get cases in and out. It was very difficult to be able to schedule around the size of the room, because if you were doing some of the bigger cases, would it even fit in those rooms? So that was part of what was causing the inefficiency that we were seeing in the heat map. The other piece we started looking at, and we delved deep into this information, is we wanted to understand their delays. If they were having delays or they were having elongated times that patients were within the perioperative suite, what was causing that? And so if you look at this is just one snapshot of a lot of analysis we do. You'll see that there actually was 1 hour and 18 minutes, both pre and post the case, that was variable time. So what was causing, in addition to the actual surgery time, another 1 hour and 18 minutes being tacked on to that case? And so we saw this all through the organization. Some of that is from inefficiency. Some of it is because of the actual layout of the building. Some of it was process. But this is where you get into some detail. So if I want to actually put a KPI in here, this is the kind of thing that I want to measure, not necessarily what their turnaround time is. And the next few slides, I'll show you why. So another analysis we did for the organization is begin looking at what happens, and we took one of their more complex cases like orthopedic total joints. And so what a lot of folks don't understand is for just any patient, not just orthopedic patients, but just any patient that has to go on the table, there's about 15 parallel processes that has to occur on average. So all of those have to, be in sync for you to be efficient and effective in an operating room. So if I'm just measuring turnaround time, that is the culmination of all of these processes. And unless I can get down to these processes, I'm really not going to know how I can affect turnover time long term. So, we go in, we look at surgeon, we look at their assistant, we look at when the nurse comes in the room, when anesthesia comes into the room, all of those different components so that we can measure it appropriately. What is interesting that we found over the years is that you can measure this with just about any IT system out there, but oftentimes these numbers are not collected. So they're either turned off or, they are not being collected effectively so that you can really measure and align all of these processes. So that's one of the first things we typically will do. So why is that important? Well, there's 3 key processes that happen that involves a lot of people. It goes from the end of the case to the patient out of the room. So I ended the surgery case and I moved the patient out of the room. The patient is out of the room to the next patient actually comes into the room. And then when that patient comes in the room, how long does it take before the surgeon actually cuts? So if you look at how we broke this down from the orthopedic assessment, the first piece took 15 individual staff members that had to come together. The second piece, 13 individual staff members, and oftentimes it's not the same people. And the third process took 14 individual staff. So it's average about 15 FTEs. It's a coordination of about 42 distinct processes. And there's actually 238 activities in this process when I go across the whole patient encounter. So by looking at it this way, it allows me to look at the dominoes and the delays within surgery. It allows me to look at elongated times and what is causing that. And it brings clarity. And it gives ownership to the right people in terms of who is impacting delays in turnover time or delays in getting a patient on the table or, getting a patient off the table, so that you can go to the person who owns that issue and can get that problem resolved. Some of the other things that we look at is block utilization. Now, what's interesting, everybody will look at block utilization and see how much time that they use their block, but they oftentimes do not look at how well they use that block of time within that block of time. So if I have an 8-hour block of time, but I'm only utilizing, let's say I'm utilizing 70, 80% of it, which is a typical measure, but I'm putting cases within that block that are poor revenue cases. There's not a patient with any kind of demands that will require for them to be in that time slot, they may be better off done in an outpatient arena. There's just a lot of factors. So are you actually maximizing the revenue within that block and the utilization of that block for the right types of cases and the right kinds of patients? And so it's an interesting way to look at it. It is one that physicians love to look at, nurses love to look at, because it's a new way of looking at that time slot and how they can be a little more productive. We also, because this organization was growing at such a rapid rate, we needed to try to figure out how or what would happen if we moved and shifted cases out of the organization. Could we shift enough out to give them some relief so that they could take on this additional volume until they made a decision in terms of what they wanted to do in terms of expansion or renovation in place or whatever they needed to do in order to be more efficient and more effective. So right now, even with all the congestion that was going on, if we look at it just the straight outpatient procedures and you shifted those out to outpatient, it was affecting their turnover time and their utilization rate, and it was impacting it by 49.8%. That still didn't give us enough of time or enough of make enough of time available to be able to take on some of these bigger cases that was going on in the organization. So we then started doing, a simulation. And here is a live simulation of the organization where we actually took time and looked at how patients were moving throughout the organization, when they moved, and if we started moving certain cases around, what actually happened and what would be the best combination for that organization to give them both the relief, to improve their efficiencies and throughput, and also improve their revenue. So when we did that, we were able to see where we could move ophthalmology, orthopedics, ENT, plastics, and podiatry out of the organization. It reduced the prime time utilization in some of the spaces down to 28%. And it would allow us to backfill those with the bigger cases that they needed to be able to get on the schedule so they were not working around the clock, because they literally were working around the clock. And they had a high burnout rate for their staff, so there were a lot of issues that we were trying to resolve. So with that, I'm going to let Aaron take this. So that's talking a little bit about operations, just a high kind of overview of operations and how we look at it. Aaron, will you share with them, when we start looking at cost and revenue and all of those different components, how we go about it?
Absolutely. So if we look at this as this facility, right? So we came in, we had all these data issues, we had very disparate data, and we needed a overarching view on, now this focus, Healthcare IQ's focus, like I said, Catalyst is very operational, Healthcare IQ is very product centric. So our analytics help drive the cost savings, right? That clinical variation that we talked about. But in order to get there, that first step is linking and combining and integrating that data. So the first thing that we do is we bring in all the spend data. We get all of the spend data. So PO, invoice, contract data, materials management catalogs, all of that data coming in. We match that data up to our internal catalog so we can make sense of it all. And then we actually bring in the clinical utilization data and link it. Again, this is the key here, is we're actually linking the data. So unlike if you just pull out of one system, you have kind of one side of the story. When you pull and then link it to the other, you start to get like the actual price you paid for an implant, right? And it's linked. You don't have to manually do that anymore. So that view comes together, and then we have tools that we're able to leverage from a cost savings perspective, clinical variation, revenue, et cetera. And what those look like, there we go, is this is a great example where we're able to essentially, I like to call this minute one savings. So as soon as we come on board, as soon as the engagement starts, we're able to take data in, turn it around very, very quickly, a couple days, and we're able to then execute or start executing on these savings. And if you look in the top right of this screen, you'll see they sent us $100 million worth of data. 83 million of that was med-surg spend. And even if we got them, if you see that savings high, that's the worst benchmark in the country. So even if we got them the worst benchmark in the country, we could save them $1 million. Because we're running out of time, we can skip through a lot of this. The next slide, Sharon, real fast. This is looking at clinical metrics and clinical benchmarks. So length of stay against the nation, cost per case against the nation, readmit rates, mortality rates. So we can look at all of those and see how you stack up. The next one is the revenue. So this is the payer profile. This allows Sharon to target procedural areas where you may be losing money, right? So you can actually start having conversations based around not just revenue, but actual profitability, margin, et cetera. You can go ahead, yeah. And then we have a visualization platform that we're able to take all that data together and put it in visually. So telling this story to the facilities is much, much easier visually than it is, through, 1,000 numbers on a screen or anything else. So from that, you can go to the next slide. We were able to save $5.4 million in this very short amount of time for this one customer. So like we said, even just getting the worst price in the country would save them $1 million. And obviously, the longer you keep those tools in place, the more and more savings you're able to identify and execute on. And then obviously we had improvements and savings in every area of the hospital, from throughput, delays, bringing in more revenue, which obviously is always key, saving on labor, and of course, standardization on the product side as well.
So with that, I will just kind of leave it out there and see if you have questions that we can perhaps answer. Be able to give you a better insight into some of the challenges that maybe we had. So, Aaron, I see several questions up here. So, okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong list. Abby, can you help us with what questions may be out?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions yet. But our emails are available, of course. So if it's something you want to reach out afterwards, that's totally fine to reach out to both of us. But no questions, so I'm good with that.
Okay. All right. Listen, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate it. And like Aaron said, our emails are out there. Our information is out there. If you have any questions, we will be more than happy to share that with you.
Thanks so much.